Welcome to your archetype exploration. Today we are exploring the Orphan archetype, which is arguably one of the most pivotal of the archetypes for us to be aware of in our healing journey because it has so much to do with our wounding. So the Orphan archetype is essentially the inner child that got hurt. And in order to step more fully into the other archetypes and to gain that sense of our multiplicity and psychological maturity, step into more authentic versions of ourselves, we have to know our wounds so that we can understand the pitfalls that they present us with, as well as the gifts that they offer us on our journey. So we will be familiarizing ourselves with the archetype cognitively before moving into a visualization to connect with the archetype on a imaginal symbolic level. We will do some journaling questions. In the live version of this program, we have a group share, and most importantly, we'll be looking at how we can use the information from this archetype, the messages from your visualization, to integrate the archetype in a more healthy way for a more healthy, whole sense of self. Once again, an archetype is a universally understood symbol, pattern of behavior, or prototype that reoccurs across different cultures and time periods, often found in literature, mythology, and psychology. It can be a character, a plot, a theme, or an image, and it represents fundamental human experiences and emotions. Essentially, archetypes are the building blocks of stories and symbols that resonate with people on a deep subconscious level. In terms of the hero's journey kind of framework that we're working with the archetypes, the Orphan exists in the preparation phase of healthy ego development. So we worked with the innocent archetype last week, and the Orphan is not better than, none of the archetypes are better than, but it's a necessary ingredient that we need to develop healthy egos and skills in the world. Without the wisdom of the innocent and the Orphan and the skills we develop in that childlike stage, we cannot move into the other archetypes and into the mysteries and into the integration of wisdom. The wounded child is another word that I use for the Orphan because it connects to this central theme of the wounding that none of us escape from in childhood. Obviously, there are some wounds that are deeper, more painful, or more, I guess the impact being more long-term and more severe. But to be alive on this planet involves the process of wounding. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But the Orphan experiences the same fall as the innocent, so the fall from grace, the fall from innocence, but to different effect. It sees it as demonstrating the essential truth that we are all on our own. The archetype is activated by all the experiences in which the child within feels abandoned, betrayed, victimized, neglected, or disillusioned. And to the degree that we do not acknowledge the Orphan inside us, that Orphan is abandoned by us as well as the world. So I guess that last point feels really important for me to hone in on, that we can also self-orphan. We can orphan ourselves anytime that we reject that vulnerable part of ourselves. So in identifying where the Orphan shows up in our life and how it's being expressed, it's useful to look at things like how we deal with our own pain. What's our relationship to shame, and when does it show up? When do we not give love to ourselves? When do we do the opposite? When do we victimize ourselves? So these are all landmarks we can start to think about when considering how and when the Orphan shows up for us, and also how we can access it to give it love in the places that it needs. As we can see, we have the Five of Cups. What is one of the pictures I put in for our Orphan today, and it kind of holds that sense of emotional despair, loss, grief, which can all be related to literal orphans, but also to the experience of being separate, to the experience of having love withdrawn or not being safe. There's a grief there, there's a despair, there's a heaviness, there's a wound. The goal of the orphan is to regain safety. So the innocent wanted to remain in safety. It's too late for the orphan. The orphan knows that suffering exists, and they've internalized that experience to mean that we're all on our own, that life is not safe. So we have to find ways, strategies to regain a sense of safety. And it won't look the same as the utopia of the innocent. It's going to look very different, the different strategies and versions of safety that the orphan finds for themselves. The orphan's fear is exploitation by others and to be the victim, victimized. Well, it's not really the fear to be the victim, but I suppose to be in that role, to be oppressed, and for there to be a perpetrator. Response to the dragon, so the dragon being a problem, the orphan will respond with powerlessness and victimization, so they will be the victim, and they'll wish for rescue, but in a different way to the innocent. So the innocent kind of expects to be rescued. They don't have anything in themselves that suggests that they can rise up and solve their own problems. They project that capacity outside of themselves. The orphan is quite similar, but it has that victim mentality of like, poor me, I'm powerless to my problems, but they're very aware that they have problems and that life is not fair or safe, but it's kind of all too overwhelming. They don't have the sense of personal empowerment to take care of the problem. Another version that they can respond to the problem is cynical compliance. So they might still be the victim, but in order to not be the victim, they will align with the oppressor. So thinking of becoming an assistant to the villain in order to not be persecuted by the villain, or to become part of radical groups in order not to be the victim of those radical groups. The task of the orphan is to process pain and disillusionment fully. Big task of the orphan, and so important for us in our relationships to be able to be with our own pain. And if we're thinking of attachment styles, the innocent might be more on the anxious attachment, where they actually can't be with their pain on their own. They don't know how to self-soothe, so they'll be very hyper-dependent on other people. Whereas the orphan almost goes in the opposite way. They don't trust other people because they've been hurt in the past, but they also are really deeply impacted by the pain. So they'll kind of blame other people or go against other people to distract them from their own pain, as opposed to being in that raw, honest awareness of, wow, that hurts. That vulnerability for the orphan is too threatening. And yet it is one of the higher tasks of the orphan to learn to process pain fully. Also to be open to receiving help from others. So a lot of the orphan is identified with its separateness, me versus you, us versus them. And yet, if it's able to sit with its pain and be with vulnerability, to admit, yes, I also am vulnerable, vulnerability exists, it can then use that vulnerability to reach out to other people who haven't oppressed them and go, hey, I need help. So the admitting of vulnerability is also a positive trait of the orphan. And the gift of the orphan is interdependence, so coexisting with others, empathy, the suffering that they've gone through allows them to deeply empathize with others, and realism. Shit happens. Bad things happen to good people. It's where we start to integrate and accept on a felt level that life isn't necessarily fair. And then what do we do with that? The strengths of the orphan. So here I've put the card of the Fifth of Pentacles, which is typically kind of a card of poverty and struggle and pessimism. But I put it on the strengths page because these people are injured. They are obviously in a space of poverty and it's very cold, uncomfortable conditions, but they've banded together. And we can assume from this picture that these two people are supporting each other in adversity. So that is one of the strengths of the orphan, to gather with other exiles or the wounded and to support one another. Finding strength in community, often against an unjust system or institution. So another version of the orphan is the rebel archetype that goes against authority and bands together with other hooligans and people on the fringes of society, and together they can be stronger, but their identity is against the other people. That's how they come together in their common suffering. One of the strengths is self-reliance. So we were talking about attachment styles before. Rather than being anxious attachment, the orphan would probably be closer to, what's the opposite of anxious? Avoidant. So soothing on one's own, struggling to soothe with other people. They found a sense of safety in being on their own, being with themselves, and that independence that it gives them. They don't necessarily feel strong in vulnerability, so they've created callousness, like tough skin, like nothing that doesn't affect me. I don't care, I hate them. But those are all ways to cope with their innate vulnerability. However, since we're on the strengths page, we'll look at it from a more strengths perspective. It's a freedom from dependence on other people or institutions, or even like a godlike authority. If we're to think of the rebel, we can look at it around religion. People who've been really damaged by religion, they lost their faith in God. That's one version of a fall from grace, but also they've gained independence and almost like an autonomy in their own lives. They don't have to adhere to the rules of the authority. And one of the strengths is waking up from illusions and facing painful realities. So there's an honesty there and a realism. Pitfalls of the orphan. So we have our Four of Cups card with the little guy sitting there on the tree. He is being handed, quite literally, from a hand in the clouds, a beautiful goblet. We can assume it's a beautiful offering of some kind or a solution. But he's not interested in that one. He doesn't want that one. He wants the 3 cups that are up ahead of him and that he can't have, presumably. So there's a sense of wanting what you don't have, focusing on the negative, a bit of bitterness, and rejecting rescue. So there's very clearly a hand from the heavens giving him something, but he's like, no, I don't want that. A bit indignant of the good things that are there. That can lead into being a victim, blaming other people, not being in a position to take personal responsibility for things. Everything is everyone else's fault. However, it could also manifest as staying in oppressive situations because they don't want to become the persecuted, but they will nonetheless be in a situation where they're abused and fulfill that victim role. What haven't I done? Pessimism, cynicism, so not having faith in things, like, oh, that's a way too lofty ideal, that's never going to happen. Skepticism, not having faith and despair. Social isolation, because they don't feel safe in relationship or don't trust other people. However, there's also, on the flip side, a risk of banding together with the wrong people. So in order to not be a victim, they might become the oppressors themselves, like bullies. And of course, pitfall is self-orphaning. So where have we rejected our innocent, our dreams that we had when we were a kid? Have we given up on ourselves? Have we given up on life? Where have we compromised our authentic self in order to regain safety? What's our sense of self-worth like? How do we treat ourselves when we're vulnerable? So the wound is very important when it comes to the orphan, and we can reframe the value of the wound. So the wound has a bad connotation, but it is crucial to learning, to our growth, and to us maturing and developing broader perspectives of life that are more balanced, more nuanced, more complex. And the wound also informs the gifts that we develop, and oftentimes it informs our path, our vocation, our purpose. So psychic wounding is not only universal, it is essential to the process of building our egos and connecting with our souls. It's almost as if the fall of grace is necessary for us to actually go on any journey, like I said before. And there are so many rewards to the journey. We meet so many guides along the way. We learn so many things, and we can ideally come back and make the kingdom or ourself a better place because of those wounds. That's at least the invitation or the challenge. So examples of the orphan, we have Lucifer, the angel that was very close to God, but he challenged God's authority. So he was banished from the kingdom of heaven, and he represents both the rebel who challenged authority and the exile who was cast away. And he kind of found his own form of belonging and his own role down in the underworld of hell, presumably. And his path was informed by this wound, this great wound and separation. On the same token, the gain of Lucifer, if there can be any, and this is purely story related, I'm not making any moral comment here, but he wasn't dependent or I guess he had no blind faith or sense of fidelity towards the authority, so he chose to be his own person or his own angel. In the middle, we have Oliver Twist and the Artful Dodger. So obviously both literal orphans and on the fringes of society. So there's that sense, once again, of a bit of an exile thing going on there. But they're also rebels because they band together against the authority, and they use their skills, their combined power together as young orphans to pickpocket, to survive, and to support each other in poverty. Then we have Harry Potter. So a literal orphan once again. And the scar is a great reminder of all the scars we carry, emotional or physical, and the gifts that that original wounding holds. So it's obviously a reminder of his great loss of his parents and all of the struggles that have come from that wounding, and it's a symbol of evil itself in the form of Voldemort. But with that scar, he's also gained powers, like being able to talk to snakes and being able to have survived that original death curse of Voldemort. And of course, he is key to saving the world because of what he's been through. Levels of the orphan. So in its shadow form, it can express as cynicism, callousness, victim, and even masochism or sadism, like taking pleasure in one's own pain. The call of the orphan, so the thing that kind of catalyzes its development, is abandonment, betrayal and self-betrayal, disillusionment, discrimination, and victimization. These are all things that can call forth the development of the orphan. And it's nice to think of it as a call because, we'll face situations in our life again where we feel betrayed, but it's an opportunity for us to integrate the orphan at a higher level. We don't have to just experience one abandonment and then never look at it again. Abandonments will continue to happen in small ways or big ways, and we can be a different orphan each time. Level 1 of the orphan is acknowledging the truth of the situation, feeling pain and powerlessness. So there's that realism there, and also self-responsibility. It's a deep bravery in the orphan as it's alone as it feels the pain. It's beautiful. Loss of faith in people, institutions, and authorities. Level 2 of the orphan, accepting the need for help, being willing to be rescued and aided by others. And level 3, replacing dependence on authorities with interdependence with others who help one another and band together against authority. So we can think about activism, grassroots community groups. The government wasn't making the change that they wanted to see, so they banded together and did it themselves. They found power in numbers, and developing realistic expectations. I once had a tutor in my counselling degree say that when there's disappointment, she immediately knows, or she said knows, that there were some unrealistic expectations that the person had. The person who was experiencing disappointment had unrealistic expectations. And at first it felt like quite an unempathic response. But if we take any kind of offense out of it, maybe that says something towards my inner orphan there. But those unrealistic expectations come from the innocent. Expectations where everything's perfect and I'm blindly in love, or anything's possible and this will happen. That's a really tall expectation, as opposed to the more measured, realistic expectation of people fuck up and not everything's going to go the way I expect it. And these might sound negative, but there's actually a maturity in them to be able to take the nuance and complexity of life and to actually acknowledge, recognize, and accept the faults and imperfections of people, which can actually lead us to loving people more genuinely, because it's we're not in love with an image, or we're not putting them on a pedestal. That's a very innocent thing to do. The orphan has a more realistic view of people and can therefore have more genuine connections. So healing begins when we really feel the pain and reality of all the times we have been orphaned from outside. And it progresses to include recognizing how we have denied parts of ourselves. Only then can the psyche feel one and whole. As each of us reclaims our orphaned selves, we no longer need to exile or oppress parts of the population who carry those banished qualities for us. So that last part feels really important. If we continue to disown our inner orphan, and in doing so self-abandon, we will also be putting that judgmental finger and that shaming finger out to anyone who reminds us of our inner orphan. So if you struggle to be with the vulnerability of other people, that's a part of you that you're not owning, in theory. I don't know your exact situation, but it's that classic kind of statement of what we dislike outside of us is something that we can look at within, and it's a shadow part. And what is in the shadows, we will project our dislike for on the outside. So the more that we can turn towards our inner orphan, the less judgmental we're going to be of people, the more truly understanding we can be of the human race. And we don't have to project those qualities onto other people because we've integrated them into our own sense of self-awareness. And that's what this whole program is about. And healing beginning when we really feel the pain of the reality. All right, time for a visualization. So get yourself comfortable. You might want to lie down or stay as you are. But as you're ready, settling into the body and closing down the eyes. And just taking a moment to relax the body wherever you feel there's any tension, any holding. Make any adjustments you need to settle a little bit more into this space where we will connect with our inner orphan. Take a beautiful breath in and a beautiful breath out. If it feels natural to sigh out the mouth, that might feel nice. And whenever you're ready, I invite you to imagine a realm inside, a space, landscape outside, or maybe in a room, somewhere that comes naturally to you, that will be the setting of you meeting with your inner orphan. And landing in that inner space, see ahead of you a little in the distance, the image of your inner orphan sitting on the floor. And it's looking sad. You can see from its body language that there's some form of hurt or pain there, rejection or disappointment. Maybe it's hugging its knees. Maybe you hear its little cry. And you start to walk over towards it, knowing that it can't see you. So you can walk with respect, but you don't have to worry about disturbing your inner orphan. And as you get up close, you can see more details of its predicament. Perhaps the emotions come into greater clarity. And the invitation now is to simply witness your inner orphan, feel its feelings. You're not here to rescue it. You're not here to comfort it yet. Your job is to simply witness your orphan as it comes up against these big feelings, and also to feel in you what your natural impulse is. What is it like for you to see your inner orphan, to see its vulnerability? Is there a repulsion? Is there an impulse to comfort? Is there shame? Or does it awaken your own sense of adult pain? Continue to witness your orphan experiencing hurt, but trust your inner orphan to be able to self-soothe, that it has what it takes to navigate these emotions and to develop a sense of independence and resilience inside. You start to see that the orphan is calming down a little bit. It's been processing its pain, and it's really felt the feelings. But you're beginning to see that it realizes nobody's coming to rescue it. And it realizes that it's still here, it's survived. And that for the benefit of its own system, it's going to start calming down. And you start to see it become still, more quiet. Maybe it's just in the silence for a little bit more. And then you see it sit up a little bit more so that it's straight. And you see that it realizes that life goes on. It's at this point that you're welcome to reach out towards the orphan. It still can't see you, but this is your moment to send it love. Maybe you place a hand on the shoulder or give it a hug. And just allow yourself to give any love that you have for this part of you to this inner child, this strong inner child. And allow yourself to give that love to the orphan. And you can feel that the orphan is beginning to feel that it's loved, even on a small level. It doesn't know where it's coming from, but there's a sense of self-love developing inside the orphan. You can now sit in front of the orphan, and you can materialize in front of the orphan so it begins to see you. You begin to look it in the eyes. It begins to look you in the eyes. And it's at this point that the orphan can tell you anything that it might want to tell you. Maybe it has a message for you. And just remain open, receptive. It doesn't have to be cognitive in its expression. It might be a feeling or an intuitive sense. But just spend a few breaths opening to the wisdom of this archetype. Let the orphan speak. And then thanking it for its wisdom. It's your turn to say anything that you'd like to say to your orphan. Let yourself say anything that you've held back. Let yourself give it comfort. Or make any apologies that might be there. Finish up your process however feels natural. Perhaps you hug. You're telling the orphan now that you have to leave, but that you know that it's completely independent, self-reliant, and has what it needs to get through the challenges, and that it will find people along its path that it can band together and create belonging with. And let your orphan know that you're always with it, that it is always with you. And if it resonates, you can make a commitment to the orphan to not self-abandon and to honour the orphan for its strength and the ways that it has survived during challenges. You can leave your orphan walking away and watch it as it walks away in its own direction, beginning its own journey. And gradually come back to your body, opening the eyes, and you can just jot down any journal points that feel potent for you around that visualization. All right, you can pause the video if you need more time to write, but I'll just offer you a few journaling prompts. And once again, you can follow my timing if you just want to do a quick journal and integrate, kind of freestyle flow. Or if you do want to pause the video and have more time to write, that's fine too. So journaling questions to come into greater contact with the orphan. Let's start with, where do I experience bitterness in my life? Where do I experience any bitterness in my life? Where do I experience a lack of trust or faith in life? Where do I experience a lack of trust or faith in life? How do I deal with pain? How do I deal with pain? What gifts have I gained from my wounds? What gifts have I gained from my wounds? Where have I self-orphaned or given up on myself? Do I have friends or people in my life who can relate to my struggles? And in honor of identifying some takeaways and integrating our orphan in our lives, how can I integrate the gifts of the orphan? You can make any more notes about how you feel the orphan shows up in your life, or parts of the orphan archetype that you'd like to adjust for yourself. How can you make the most out of this information to meet yourself where you're at on your hero's journey? Thank you so much. I will see you next week, all going well, for the warrior.